Well, this is weird. I'm addressing you from my studio at the church. This is where I make some of my yoga videos, and not where I expected to be teaching our class. So I hope everyone got home safely, or to wherever you're going, and I hope you're staying safe. Clearly, they are unusual times, and boy, sometimes the world has a way of slowing us down. We are learning in this class what's important and what isn't, and clearly Kent State has helped us decide that being safe and being with our families is important at this time. So I hope you and your families are well and safe and are being productive with the time. So let me just throw out a story. I have all these parables and stories. This is, in particular, these stories, by the way, could work in any religion, so let's just make it a once upon a Jewish time story. There is a land, a king, almost always a king, and they're falling on hard times. There's been a famine, there's been economic hardship, and he's basically blaming the Jewish tribe. This is on the heels of our anti-Semitism talk, which is where we left off in class. And everyone's blaming the Jews, and so he's basically being encouraged to, in effect, wipe them out. And he calls the lead rabbi, the elder teacher of the Jewish community, and he says to them, he gives them an option. He says, I'm under pressure to exile you or wipe you out, but I'll give you the opportunity. If you can give me something such that whenever I am unhappy, it will make me happy, I would be happy to spare your people. You have 24 hours. And the elder goes back to the Jewish community, and he returns 24 hours later, and he gives the king a ring. And the king looks at him and says, "A ring? Seriously? A ring? You think I don't have any rings? I have a ton of rings. You know this is going to sentence you to exile, sentence you to destruction." And the old rabbi looks at the king and says, "But sire, read the inscription in the ring." And the king looks inside, and the inscription in the ring reads, "This too shall pass." And clearly, as all these stories end, the king was very happy with his gift. He spares the Jewish people, and everyone lives happily ever after. This too shall pass. When we're in the throes of a problem, it seems like the sun's never going to come out, but this too shall pass. I talked about who's on your committee. You put the poorest person you've ever met on that committee, they'll remind you what's important and what isn't. It's time to take a pause. Just like when we get sick, sometimes we run ourselves into the ground. Sometimes I think the world must run itself into the ground. It's time to slow down. It's time to realize what's important, which is family and love and friendship and supporting each other and helping to reduce suffering in this world. There's another Jewish saying. It's really pessimistic. This is a saying by a Jewish people that have been persecuted for thousands of years. The saying goes, people make plans and God laughs. That is really depressing. I add an ending to that. This is the Larryism associated with it. I think it's better to laugh with God than to cry alone. We need to look for the positive. There are teachings here. We look for the teachings. You know, in Judaism, one of the overriding teachings is that this interpretation of what's happened to the Jewish people. We talked about anti-Semitism and how long that conspiracy theory has been around. And it has its own life and its own proof because it's been around so long. And to some people, it's the proof that somehow the Jews deserve it. Jews have a totally different interpretation of this. The Jewish interpretation is that they suffer because God loves them. That parental love, when people really care about you, they really want you to learn, and sometimes they will inflict punishment to try and change behavior. And that this is an example of parental love. I don't think it's punishment for sin. There is an element of karma. There are teachings here. Remember the definition of an asana. A potentially uncomfortable position that we put ourselves in and challenge ourselves to smile. Teaching you in this camera from in this place is a little uncomfortable. Let's all smile. At least we have each other. Let's get down to work. So let's pick up where we left off. Where we left off was a timeline. We did do the anti-Semitism lecture, which we actually did in order to prepare for what was going to be the visit from our Holocaust survivor, and clearly that was an opportunity missed by all of us. Actually, right after class that Tuesday, I had learned that Olga was canceling anyway because at 90 years old, she wasn't going to go out and open herself up, and the coronavirus information wasn't even all that prevalent yet. Hadn't gotten to the level we've gotten now, and so she was canceling. And then at 4 o'clock, our president canceled classes, and so we couldn't have her anyway. So a missed opportunity. Hopefully there'll be another chance.
A little bit of worrying pays off sometimes.
This is my cameraman. All right, so let's turn to, I want to go back. Where we really left off was the timeline. The timeline that brought us to around the beginning of the first millennia. I'm just going to throw a few dates in as a reminder. So I'm going to go back to 586 BC. This was when the first temple was destroyed. Solomon had built the first temple in 950. It was destroyed by the Babylonians. Destroyed when the Babylonians conquered. And what happened after the destruction by the Babylonians is that there was an exile. Much of the Jewish community was exiled to Babylonia, to Babylon. And Babylon will ultimately become a center of Judaism. In 520 BC, the second temple, the temple is rebuilt by the Persians. The Persians conquer the Babylonians, and the second temple is built, and some of the Jewish community does return to Jerusalem and to Judea, but there will remain a Jewish community in Babylon. And you will see how that plays out later in this lecture. Remember, around 500, we have the appearance of the Torah. 500, that year for the axial age. The same year, we had the Buddha show up. In northern India, we had the Upanishads were written in approximately 500 BC. We had Lao Tzu in China. We had Confucius. We had Socrates in Greece. The Torah shows up in the Middle East in written form. Now, Jews feel that Moses did it much earlier, and Moses, one take is Moses received it in its entirety from God on Mount Sinai, and the other take is that Moses wrote it, the 5 books of Moses. That would still have put it back in about 1200 BC. But the first written evidence of the Torah, we have found them in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran caves of the Essenes, and we have the earliest copies of the Torah itself, all showing up around 500 BC. Fast forward to, I want to fast forward to about 50 BC and introduce you. So at the time, what we've got teachers. Now, we saw this in Hinduism, the issue of gurus, and gurus passing the teachings on to their disciples and to their students, and guru meant teacher. In Judaism, the word is rabbi. Rabbi simply translates as teacher. Now, clearly, it has become a title. It has become a title, and even back then, it was a title. It was the rabbi. There was the elder, the wise rabbi. There was always kind of a head when we talked about, like, the guru with a capital G. And then there were other rabbis, and then there were also just teachers, and that would be a different word, actually. So in 50. There are these little communities that literally, they're schools that center around a particularly charismatic, a great teacher. And in 50, we have a great teacher show up, and his name is Hillel. Rabbi Hillel. Actually, he's born in about 50 BC. He goes from about 50 BC to about 24 AD. This is Rabbi Hillel, who was, I think you could say, the greatest rabbi of that particular time. Hillel is known for many things. He's quoted in the Talmud. We're going to learn about the Talmud in today's lecture. Hillel is known for a number of sayings. Hillel is the one that said, if not for me, who is for me? But if only for me, what am I? That wisdom balance between self and other. This is a saying of Hillel. Hillel's also known for, if not now, when? Coach speak. It's like try to get you to do things. This is Hillel, and he's also famous for being asked. Now, understand what they've been doing here. The Torah has shown up, and now what these rabbis are doing are interpreting it. The study of the Torah, the reinterpretation. What did it really mean? What are the hidden meanings in the Torah? This is what's been going on all this time. And Hillel has his interpretations of the Torah, and he's known for one famous one in which he is asked, Rabbi Hillel, can you summarize the Torah while standing on one foot? And Rabbi Hillel stands on one foot. This is one of the first times in which this is invoked in Western teachings. He stands on one foot and he says, "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you." That is the teaching of the Torah. The rest is the story. That's Hillel. That's Hillel. This is a little bit of a precursor, because understand that this is going to span the time of Jesus. Jesus is born in about 4 BC. We have the birth of Jesus. And we will end up coming back here and blowing this up when we get to Christianity, and we'll understand what's going on in the early formation of Christianity, and we'll certainly look at the life of Jesus. Jesus would have known of Hillel. Hillel was the famous teacher of the time, and Jesus follows right on his heels. Now, we'll come back to why that's important. For Judaism, probably one of the biggest dates in Judaism, the date that most observant Jews know today. The date is 70 AD. In 70 AD, Rome destroys the Second Temple. This is the destruction of that Second Temple. I write as bad on the whiteboard as I do on the on my flip chart. So the Second Temple is destroyed. Now, why this is monumental in Judaism? It was a temple cult. Remember, we talked about this. Everything that that religion was centralized in the temple. For Jews, God lived in the temple, in the innermost sanctuary, in the innermost court, in the Holy of Holies. It was where God dwelled. This was the Ark of the Covenant. This is where you went to worship God. And with the destruction of the temple, Judaism floundered. What was everyone supposed to do? Big issue. In 135, there is what is called the Second Revolt. The Second Revolt, the first revolt was actually in, what brought on the destruction was that there was a revolt in 66 in which Jews tried to overthrow Rome, and the Emperor Vespasian came in and destroyed the temple. And he had his own problems back in Rome, and he took it out on the Middle East. And then in 135, there is the Second Revolt, led by a man, sometimes called the Bar Kokhba Revolt, a man by the name of Bar Kokhba, who fancied himself as a Messiah, by the way. He was going to bring peace, overthrow Rome, and restore and rebuild the temple. This was his big promise. And at this time, it's the Emperor Hadrian, and he didn't like the joke. He came in. This is he crushes this revolt even more viciously than just the destruction of the temple back in 70. Temple was destroyed here. There was a tax put on Jews, but there wasn't the wholesale wiping out of as many Jews as they could until 135. Bar Kokhba brought that on. It's a famous story about Masada. Masada is a mountain fortress that the last holdouts of the last revolutionaries held out. They went They went to the top of this, held out in this fortress, and the Romans just camped at the bottom, cut off all their supplies. There never really was a battle. And ultimately, the Jews all committed suicide. This is a famous story in Judaism, and this is the story of Masada. I'm afraid it became a model in the 70s for the Jonestown Kool-Aid. And if you don't know what that's about, I'm not going to go into the details. But if you've heard about it, that was a cult in Guyana that in which everyone committed suicide because the leader said so. 135, the destruction, really, the second wave of destruction, so to speak. And now what happens? At virtually the same time, and by the way, you had this as homework, but I don't expect you to have done it at this point. A man is born. A man is born in Judea. A man that will become seminal. This is monumental in the development of Judaism. Who is the man? The man is known as Judah Hanasi. Judah. Judah Hanasi, that means Judah the prince. Otherwise known as, let me just tell you how important this guy is in Judaism. He is known as the rabbi. The rabbi. Just monumental in terms of stature. And what does he do? He writes by 200 AD what Judah Hanasi does. It's interesting because Judah Hanasi does not really compose anything really original. What he does is he takes and writes down all of the teachings of these famous rabbis. When I talked about this system back in here, of all these famous rabbis that had their disciples, and they gave their talks, and they gave their what became known as their oral teachings. What Judah Hanasi does is he collects all the oral teachings. He collects them, he writes them down into a book, and the book comes out in 200. The book is called the Mishnah. The Mishnah. The Mishnah means the teachings. Teachings. The teachings. Remember, in Theravada Buddhism, we had the teachings of the elders, Vada, Veda, knowledge, teachings. The Mishnah, a collection. This is where Hillel's stories show up. This is where Hillel's teachings, along with all the teachings of the early rabbis. He collects it all into one book and presents it in a way, and this is what now begins the development of what we would call Rabbinic Judaism. And that name, Rabbinic Judaism, really has this meaning of based on the rabbi's teachings, based on rabbinic teachings, and he interprets them in light of the fact that there is no temple anymore. There is no temple. So what replaces the temple? Prayer. Prayer replaces sacrifice. These are some of the translations, so to speak, that are made. These are some of the teachings. And so Judah Hanasi, in effect, writes, I say publishes, it doesn't mean that it was came off a printing press, but it was copied, and it made its way to Babylonia. And it also was in Jerusalem, And for the next 250 years, the rabbis of that time, both in Babylonia and in Jerusalem, add commentaries. They take this Mishnah and they write commentary, interpretations. And by the way, they have different opinions. There are majority opinions and minority opinions. It's amazing what develops. And till 450, this 250 years, and what comes out is what is called the Gemara. The Gemara. The commentary. Gemara actually means learning. This is the learning. What we learn from the teachings of the rabbis in the Mishnah. And these get written down. And now what happens, I'm going to flip my chart here. What happens is the Mishnah and the Gemara get put together into what is now called the Talmud. The Talmud equals the two books combined, the Mishnah plus the Gemara. This is the Talmud. Talmud means knowledge. Look what this formula, this is saying that knowledge equals teaching plus learning. Kind of a model for our class, ideally, where the teaching and the learning. This is the Talmud. The Talmud, first of all, let's turn to a little demonstration here now. I'd like to show you, just by no value judgments intended. This is a Bible. This is a Bible with both the Old and the New Testaments. This is a complete Bible. And I would just show you that this part, what we have right here in this book, is the Torah. So these are the first 5 books. This is how long they are. The Torah, the first 5 books of the Jewish Bible. From here to here is the rest of the Jewish Bible. So what happens is that after Moses, there are many more stories, the stories of David and Solomon and the prophets and the kings and the Proverbs and Psalms and all of these books are the rest of the Old Testament, and it's quite a bit. Gives you a feel for it. This is sometimes Judaism, in fact Islam will call Judaism the people of the book. Lot of book. This, just by comparison, is the New Testament. Shorter. This is the New Testament, with the 4 Gospels and the letters and the other books. Now what I'd like to show you is what the Talmud looks like. This is the Talmud. Well, let me show you how it's structured, because it's fascinating. This is, the way it's written, is that the Mishnah is in the center. So the 2 books are actually superimposed on each other, the Mishnah and the Gemara. what you have is the teachings of the Mishnah, the oral teachings that Judah Hanasi pulled together. And then all around it is the commentary, the Gemara. The Mishnah plus the Gemara. Now this is an English translation as well, so that's part of what also makes it bigger. But you look at the size of the book and the size of the printing, and this is a huge book. This is what I really want to show you about this is that this is the basis of our Western system of justice. What we have in our justice system is precedents, previous rulings. It's part of what comes up here. Minority and majority opinions. That's what the Supreme Court comes. Our Western system of justice is modeled on this book. And now let me tell you the punchline. This book, as big as it is, by the way, Jewish books go backwards. They go from right to left. You'll see if we were to have been in the temple field trip, and I'll let you know what's going to happen with field trips. Obviously nothing, but you would have seen that the prayer book goes from right to left instead of left to right. This book is one of 42 volumes. The Talmud is 42 times the size of this book. I happen to mention that Judaism is the emphasis on learning and the emphasis on literacy. This is what is studied. This is what in Judaism, the schools of study of the Torah and the Talmud are called yeshivas. This is what they spend their time poring over. The wisdom, the teachings, the commentary, the knowledge of the Talmud. Primary book, especially in what is now developing this element of Rabbinic Judaism. Just so you know, in fact, this is interesting about this Talmud. This is called actually the Babylonian Talmud. This is a translation of the Babylonian Talmud. I said that this goes back to that timeline that there was a major Jewish community. Some of the Hillel was actually born in Babylon. He does come to Jerusalem. He sets up his school in Jerusalem. But there is both a Babylonian Talmud and a Jerusalem Talmud. Because over those 250 years, scholars in both places pored over the Mishnah as well as the Torah. And out comes, and then those two books, truthfully, the Babylonian Talmud, for the most part, takes precedence in Judaism as the more scholarly of the two, just so you know. This is the basis on which Rabbinic Judaism ultimately is based upon. It is from 450 AD that Judaism then begins to travels to Spain, travels to Europe, travels to Eastern Europe, a couple of other important people, and that is that in about 1000, what we've got is a man. The man becomes known as Rashi. Any study of Judaism, any study of the Talmud, any study of the Torah, always involves the commentary of Rashi. Rashi is the probably the most important later commentator who has notes throughout the Talmud explaining what it is that's being discussed then to you. He's actually in the 11th century, 1040 to about 1100, 1105. This is when he lives. He lives in Spain. Spain is a major area of in which Judaism flourished. And following Rashi is a man by the name of Maimonides. Maimonides comes along in about in the 12th century, 1138 to I think it was 1204. I have here. Maimonides becomes a Jewish philosopher, also in Spain. I hope I don't have that confused. I'm pretty sure Rashi was in Spain, but I know Maimonides was in Spain. And Maimonides adds another dimension in which he writes, he basically pulls out for everyone's codification. He pulls out of the Talmud and the Torah what he calls the laws. He writes down all the laws. Now we looked at those 613 commandments. That's been pulled out of the Torah. He writes something called the Mishnah Torah, not to be confused with the Mishnah plus the Gemara, which equals the Talmud. But his writing of the Mishnah Torah becomes a writing of in effect, the oral law written down, taken out of all those oral teachings. He summarizes and codifies, but he's primarily known for giving us what is called the 13 principles of faith. The 13 principles of faith in Judaism. This is his idea of the basis of Judaism. This is what he comes up with in the book that was a possible purchase that I didn't require. You find it. You can simply Google the 13 Principles of Faith. I am going to take a moment to read them to you because they are clearly the principles of what today we would call orthodoxy. The more fundamental take on Judaism. Back then, it only was Orthodox. This is what's basically developing. That Reform, and in a later lecture we'll talk about the development of conservative and Reform Judaism. That doesn't come along until the 1800s. So. Just like in Catholicism, it's the Catholic Church for a long time until opinions do finally emerge and create other denominations. Maimonides writes, I believe with perfect faith that 1. The Creator is author and guide of everything that exists. 2. The Creator is one. His unity is unlike that of anything else. He is our God and exists eternally. 3. The Creator has no body, physical body, or physical characteristics, and cannot be compared with anything else that exists. 4. The Creator is first and last of all beings. 5. It is right to pray to the Creator, but to no other being. 6. All the words of the prophets are true. 7. The prophecy of Moses is true, and he was the father, that is, the greatest of all prophets, both before and after him. 8. The Torah now in our possession is that given to Moses. We already kind of discussed that scholastic issues around that. This is a principle of faith in Judaism. 9. The Torah will not be changed, nor will the Creator give us any other Torah. 10. The Creator knows the deeds and thoughts of all people. 11. He rewards those who keep his commandments and punishes those who disobey. 12. Though the Messiah is delayed, one must constantly expect his coming. And 13. The dead will be resurrected. The 13 principles of faith of Maimonides. He really advances and codifies and hones in some of these religious principles. When we talk about, you could say, when we look at that summary of Judaism, the 13 principles of faith, that's a summary right there of the core beliefs of Judaism, certainly of fundamental Judaism. So that's Maimonides. And I thought I'd introduce you to one more player in this. This is a whole explanation of how Judaism develops over hundreds and thousands and roughly 2,000 years. The player comes up in the 1700s. His name is, well, he's really been given a title. His name is almost not important. He is called the Baal Shem Tov, which means this is a title. It is the how can I say this? It's the title of the good name. He's the teacher of the good name. I'm missing. There's a translation word here that I'm not thinking about right now. But oh gosh, I'm trying to translate Baal. Okay. Okay. My cameraman's going to look it up and help me. The Baal Shem Tov comes along in roughly 1700. He lived from 1700 to 1760. It is a man. It is a man, and he is kind of he's one of these rabbis that travels from town to town. He's a healer. He's got mystical elements to him. He's primarily in the Ukraine. He's in Eastern Europe. And he is the founder of what is called Hasidism. So the reason I want to introduce this to you is if, for example, you go to New York City and you see those, the Jews, that classic, stereotypical, the Jews with the black coats and the hats and the long sideburns and the beards, and they actually wear shirts that have these fringes sticking out. We will, about 2 lectures from now, we'll be talking about Jewish prayer and Jewish life, and some of those will get explained to you. But what's it called? The
master of the
master of the good name. The master of the good name.
Or one with a good reputation. He was from Ukraine.
Yeah, the master of the good name.
By the way, Rashi, French.
Oh, good to know. Rashi is from France.
There you go. Bonus for corrections.
Thank you. The master of good name. Adds a level of mysticism, what you don't realize, and this is hard to really figure out because you see these people in New York City and you think they're really solemn and devout and really serious fundamental Jews. The Baal Shem Tov, this sect called Hasidism are really the hippies of Judaism. This is what's so funny about this. He introduces dancing. Now, clearly, and if anyone's seen Fiddler on the Roof, the dancing is not with between males and females. The two males, if it's a female, then they have to hold a handkerchief between them or something. But the Baal Shem Tov introduced dancing into Jewish devotion, introduced wine and alcohol into Jewish devotion. They celebrate the Torah. In Hasidic celebrations, they dance and sing and they look so serious. And in reality, this is a branch of Judaism that is very, very prevalent in New York City. Clearly, this is, and they have brought all the trappings, the coats from Eastern Europe. They still wear them. They're not giving up their traditions, and that's really who they are. I have funny story about, I was in New York City once, and Susan and I were in New York, and actually we were there for the national, it was called National Books for a Better Life Award. And we were there, my books, our book Small Change was a finalist for this national award, and there were 5 finalists in our category, and it was a whole big deal. It was in a theater. They took over a theater in New York, and Meredith Vieiro, the hostess of the Today Show, was she ran the show. She was the officiant, so to speak, and they had lots of categories, and we had gotten there early, and like hours early, and so we had time to spend, and we're walking from our hotel to this auditorium, and there is a Jewish store, a store of Jewish items, Jewish art, Jewish prayer books, Jewish prayer shawls. They call it Judaica, things associated with Judaism. It was a store, and Susan and I walked in. And we walked in, and we were walking around, and we were looking at things from Israel, and we're all the way in the back of the store. It's about 4:00 in the afternoon. The ceremony for our book award does not start till about 7 p.m. And all of a sudden, like a flood, about 150 Jewish men with black coats, the Hasids of this this Hasidism group of Jews, takes over the store. No women. Susan is stuck. We're stuck in the back of the room. It was like a foreign invasion, and they all start. It was for the afternoon prayer, and they start to what is called daven. They've got their books out. They're all facing east because you face Jerusalem. We'll talk about Jewish prayer in a. I don't know, maybe it's the next, I think it's in two lectures. But they stand there, they go up and down, they chant, the Hebrew is flying faster than you can possibly understand it, and it goes on for about a half an hour, and we're hiding, literally hiding in the back of the store. We were trapped, and it felt like we were in a foreign country. It was wild. It was and I was raised in a Jewish family. It was so foreign to me. I couldn't relate to it. It was really interesting. Just an example of what we have today in New York City, a direct descendant of what the Baal Shem Tov began in Ukraine in the 1700s. This is what we have today is not ancient Judaism. What we learned those 2 lectures when we went through the story of the Torah and King David and brought it all the way to the start of the millennia, that's the ancient Judaism that is shared, and we've talked about this, by all 3 faiths. It is shared by Jews, it is shared by Christians, it is shared by Muslims. This is the basis of the 3 monotheistic faiths, what is sometimes called the Abrahamic tradition. We all go back to Abraham. All 3 of these faiths. What happens is that when ancient Judaism ends, it ends with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. It ends. That centralized temple cult ends. And what comes out of it? Side by side, developing side by side. Christianity. Christianity will begin from basically the same date in 70. Well, clearly it's going to go back to Jesus' crucifixion, but the development of the religion of Christianity, it is in the 70s that the Gospels were written. The development of the Christian religion, the development of, you could say, modern Judaism. Technically, we call it Rabbinic Judaism. Begins in 70. Ultimately, when we get to the 600s, we will be looking at Islam, the development of Islam. Rabbinic Judaism, what we have today, no longer based in the temple, no longer based in sacrifices, based in a modern interpretation of the Torah, based in the book that is the Talmud. This is what Jews work with today, honor today, learn from today, and remember in Judaism. Judaism has this ongoing tradition of, I could say, arguing. What I really want to say is interpreting, looking at these teachings as ancient as they are in the light of today's, what's going on today. Many church services and Jewish services are no longer being held right now. They're in remission as we fight the coronavirus. But if you went to a Jewish service, you could expect a rabbi giving an interpretation of what is happening today in terms of some story, some teaching from the Talmud or the Torah. This is what Jews do. What do you?
Remember that photo I sent you from the book?
Yeah, which book?
See if you can read it. The Kingdom.
Oh. I don't have a chance. We're winding down this lecture right now. Thank you, Barrett. So that's my first lecture. It's in the can. Clearly, I'm not sure. Let's just turn to the mechanics. I'm going to do a series of these. We're going to go figure out how to post this. I'm going to send you the link. This is all I'm going to record today until I make sure that you're all getting them and that it came through okay and that you could understand them and that you took notes on them. Somehow we'll have to figure out how to grade. I don't know the answer to that yet. I'm looking for some guidance, some kind of a test on showing the fact that you listen to these lectures and you learn something from them. Our provost is asking that we continue pushing you forward in your learning. Good enough is what we're dealing with. We do have 7 quizzes. Some of you are not in the best shape. with those 7 quizzes, but we do have some basis for grading in there, and there will be more added. The field trips appear to be by the wayside, so I'll figure out some way to do some kind of a test of some kind. Maybe as I finish Judaism, we'll do a test on Judaism, and a test on Christianity, and a test on Islam. So we'll see how that plays out. No commitments right now. Right now, just trying to get out some teachings. Have a great day. Stay safe. I miss you all. I miss your feedback and your questions. Feel free to ask me any questions on an email. And if it's a good question, I'll broadcast it out. And if it's personal, I'll be glad to answer you. So, by the way, if you need a quicker answer, text on the syllabus is my phone number, and text. I answer those faster. So have a great day, and take care of your families. See you next time.